Welcome to Summit University. Today our guest is Steven Acuff. He's a best-selling author and lecturer on health and diet in Europe and the United States. Mr. Acuff specializes in the macrobiotic diet. He is an instructor at the Cauchy Institutes in Massachusetts and a nutritional counselor at a medical clinic in Germany. He is also director of a macrobiotic center in Sweden. Mr. Acuff is here today to talk about Oriental Diagnosis.
Yes, our subject for this seminar is Oriental Diagnosis, or sometimes we just call it health evaluation, evaluating our health. And in this first hour, I'm going to be introducing you to the concepts of health seen from the macrobiotic perspective. We call this Oriental Diagnosis or health evaluation because we take the inspiration for this style of diagnosis from the teachings of the Far East. These go far back to Chinese texts, many centuries old. My teacher has been Michio Kushi, who is the best-known teacher of macrobiotics in the world, a Japanese man who has lived over 40 years in the US, and this is a big subject we'll be covering, and if you would be interested in reading more about this, you can also get his book, which is put out by Japan Publications, called The Book of Oriental Diagnosis, How to See Your Health. Sometimes people wonder what is the difference between this Oriental diagnosis and medical diagnosis. So let's start right there. Many people vastly overestimate the ability of conventional medicine to diagnose problems. People will tell me that they don't feel well, but their blood tests, the liver tests, kidneys, everything seems to be in order, black and white, the computer readouts, but they don't feel well. And doctors have a very one-sided way of doing their diagnosis. When I say doctors, I'm speaking of doctors in general. There are certainly exceptions, doctors who deal with natural methods, natural diagnosis methods. But for this, let's say the normal, conventional doctor, these usual diagnosis methods are used, and they rely totally on them. I have had countless number of people who have come to me a bit desperate because all of the tests show that they're fine, but they don't feel well. And for a doctor, the only logical conclusion is that here we have someone who has some psychological problems and should go see a psychiatrist or clinical psychologist. And unfortunately, this is often the wrong way to do it. The person will not feel better by getting sedatives or some other kinds of psychological medication, but rather the person really is feeling what we call dis-ease. You know, the word disease comes from this concept of dis-ease. We're no longer at ease. We're no longer in harmony. And if we understand the signals the body gives, we can pick up on our dis-ease much earlier than we can if we wait for a doctor to come with some kind of pathological diagnosis. Because once you have cancer or once you have diabetes, a doctor can diagnose this, do a diagnosis of this. But unfortunately, it's a bit too late then, because medical science does not have answers to these very severe health problems. So the whole point of doing what we're doing today and in the coming sessions is to learn how to read those signals ourselves so that we become more self-sufficient and more independent of doctors' diagnosis. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't need doctors' diagnosis. These two do not exclude each other. The kind of diagnosis a doctor can do can sometimes be very valuable. Sometimes we need x-rays. Sometimes we will get some good insight into our health problems through normal medical diagnostic procedures. But especially difficult are what we can call the gray zone. The gray zone are people who are neither sick nor healthy. They're somewhere in between. They've got things like chronic fatigue. I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about. They have aches and pains or just different things, but they don't have a clear clinical diagnosis of a problem. And if medical science had answers to the severe killers of our time, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, then we could wait until we get these diseases and then be diagnosed by medical science and then get their treatments. Unfortunately, medical science can do very little to stop the course of these diseases. It's often more things like patch-up jobs or attempts to postpone the development of the disease, but real cures are indeed rare. And I'm speaking out of experience after having seen some thousand patients. I work in a clinic in Germany, as you just heard, and many of these people have heard from their doctors, eat anything that tastes good to you, eat whatever you like. Food has no influence on your health. Now, unfortunately, most patients don't realize that the average doctor can go through an entire medical training and never learn anything about nutrition, with the possible exception of doctors who deal with diabetes. But because the man has a medical degree, people assume that he knows what he's talking about. So as we learn to read the signals ourselves, we can put medical doctors more in their proper place, not up on a pedestal somewhere, but as human beings who are practicing a certain knowledge that they have learned, which can be valuable and in certain circumstances is life-saving, of course. But we're going to be dealing more here with the problems that have to do with the wear and tear of the body that goes over years, developing chronic problems, not acute things. And we'll be then learning how to see those things on ourselves and on those around us so that we get some pre-warning about what is happening to our bodies at the moment. And if we understand these warnings, then we're more motivated to live a natural lifestyle which decreases the wear and tear, which decreases the stress on the body. We can say that our health problems are created by stress. But most people limit stress to the idea of trying to do more things than we have time to do. That's a very convenient definition of stress, but unfortunately is very one-sided. When you eat what we can call the standard American diet, the SAD or SAD diet, then you are creating stress in your body from morning to night and even through the night, because you're taking in an amount of cholesterol, fat, highly refined carbohydrates, which cause the liver, the kidneys, your whole body balancing system, a lot of stress. You're stressing yourselves from morning to night. So when we talk about the cause of disease, definitely stress is up there at the top, and we're going to be able, through these techniques of health evaluation that macrobiotic teaching can give us, we're going to learn how to see this stress developing so that we can do something about it and not wait passively until we get a pathological diagnosis. So that's the whole point. And when we do this, then we find that we become less dependent on medical doctors. This can be very valuable information for everyone. I have been following the development of medical insurance, not only in this country, but also in Sweden, where I live. And regardless of whether it is a state-run system, as in Sweden, or much more private, as in the US, wherever we see it, we have the same problem, that medical costs are rising so fast that most likely in the course of the 90s, we're going to see most health care systems going bankrupt. Just think of last year. We had an inflation rate of, what, maybe 8 or 10% in the US, I'm not sure. In any case, the costs of health care last year went up 18%. And this is going in a progressively accelerating rate. So it's very wise of us to learn now how to deal with our own imbalances so that we will become less dependent on health care by the so-called professionals. And I can't help but harbor the view that one of the reasons why doctors are so disinterested in natural lifestyle as a health promoting measure is because there's very little profit in it. Medical doctors are businessmen. They pay rent and they pay wages to people who help them, and there is always an undertone there of promoting the things that make your business run better and ignoring the things that are free. So let's not, as I said, overestimate what doctors can do, gladly, of course, using their knowledge when necessary in acute situations. But what we're going to be talking about here is using natural methods, especially food, as a way of making balance. So, in this series of lectures about health evaluation, I'm going to be talking a lot about food. And this is not because I'm food fixated. This is because food is the #1 influence on our health. This is the basis of macrobiotic thinking. It is our biological basis. This doesn't mean that food is the only influence on our health, but it is the most important. It is, molecule for molecule, it is the most intimate contact that we have with our environment. And if you look at medical research, which I have spent a lot of time doing, we can find many, many studies which verify that food is the major influence on our health condition. Food is the major influence on whether we are healthy or sick. So, our decisions of what we put in our mouth will decide, to a large degree, whether we live a healthy, harmonious life or whether we're constantly plagued by health problems. So I'm going to give you a few insights into macrobiotic thinking about food, because in the following sessions we're going to be coming back to these again and again. The interesting thing about macrobiotics is that it has a theoretical basis which you then verify through your own experience. The basic concept of macrobiotics is don't believe. If you can't experience something in your own body, in your own realm of feeling, if you can't feel it, then don't believe it. If a doctor tells you, for example, that you should take a lot of milk products to prevent osteoporosis, then don't believe it. But if you get a sensitivity for food, you'll find that taking a lot of dairy products makes you feel clogged, blocked, less aware, and you'll have a hard time believing that this is the way our Creator meant for us to prevent the decalcification of our bones. And you become a little independent. And you dare to have a different opinion than you'll hear from 99.9% of all doctors. Take a lot of milk or else your bones will decalcify. Now, if I had listened to that advice, I don't think I would be as happy as I am today, because I have been pretty healthy. I have had in the last 2 decades no medical treatments. I haven't visited any doctors. I've had no blood tests. I have healthy children. And I know lots of people who live the same way. This doesn't mean we can't get sick tomorrow, but it does mean that our experience has verified the theory which I'm going to give you. And when we get the perspective of macrobiotic diagnosis, which all of you will have at the end of this course, more or less, then we can think of it as what in macrobiotics is sometimes called the magic spectacles, which we put on and we see people in a different way. And you'll see that those people who follow the doctor's advice and take dairy food 3 times a day, plus snacking in between, that these people don't look as healthy as they should. And that those who stay away from such unhealthy foods, that these people look healthier. But of course, we have to get a macrobiotic diagnosis perspective. Some people think that fully packed red cheeks are a sign of health, and that if you're a little thin, like me, you look a little unhealthy. That's because we're conditioned to have a certain perspective. I have lectured in Asia and been very happy to blend in with the population. In Asia, most of the people have a body build and a weight proportion similar to mine and most people who eat a full macrobiotic fare. But because the food in the Western industrialized countries is very much built on highly refined carbohydrates, which form fatty acids in the body, among other things, because they take a lot of animal food, including dairy food, animal quality food, they are blocked and they get a fullness in their bodies which appears to be healthy, but in fact is not. And many people are not aware of the fact that slightly underweight people are actually healthier. Just to give you one example, anorexia. Studies have shown that anorexic women, which includes a lot of women in the late teens and 20s, a problem that's getting more and more, anorexic women have astonishingly little infections and health problems as long as they keep 60% of what is considered normal body weight. If they go under 60%, they can get problems. But compared to bulimic women who have more chaotic eating habits, they're eating a lot and then eating nothing and eating a lot, these women have much more health problems because a slight underweight is actually very good for your body. So as we go through our course here on health evaluation from a macrobiotic perspective, let's keep in mind that we want to get rid of the prejudices we have about body weight, because otherwise we will have the feeling that people who actually are healthy and slightly underweight actually need more cheese, they need more eggs, they need more meat, which is what you'll hear the average person say to them, and you get very confused. And especially for those who choose the path of healthy food and healthy living, there can be a lot of confusion, because someone who hears 20 or 30 times how bad they look, they'll start believing it. You know? Say, well, I feel good, but everybody tells me I look bad. There must be something wrong with me. So the important thing is that we just relax about it, and we accept that the average person does not have a balanced perspective. And I have taught this Oriental Diagnosis for several years, and it's been interesting to see who really does something with it. Like, who takes it beyond the theory and works with it. And basically the only people that really work with this over a long time are people who eat healthy foods and who try to keep a balance. Because how can you really be sensitive to the imbalances in other people if you yourself are stuffing yourself with cholesterol and saturated fat? Fat has a consistency that a little bit like rubber. It's like an insulator. It insulates us. It separates us from our own body feelings. It separates us from our environment. It makes us less sensitive. For those interested in spiritual matters, we can even see that these fat blockages sit very deep, and we'll have a little bit of that kind of diagnosis also here in the course of these sessions, that these sit very deep and they block the flow through what we call in macrobiotics the spiritual channel, which is a flow of energy through 7 energy points or chakras. And if you feel the hardness in people who are eating the standard American diet, you know that this energy is not flowing smoothly. It can't. There's too much hardness. So the body has to be flexible. And we get that through proper food choices. So this is the important thing. Now we'll be going into some of the individual organ weaknesses that people have, things like kidneys, liver, lungs, intestines. It's important to remember that if I speak of kidney weakness, then I don't necessarily mean that someone is ripe for dialysis. Or if I say, liver, this doesn't mean that the person must have been drinking a lot of alcohol. I've noticed through the years that many people have the idea that we were given this liver only to detox alcohol. But actually, the liver was there long before alcohol was. And we can do a lot of damage to our liver and abstain totally from alcohol. And especially for people living in this modern, polluted environment, the industrial age, these people have a liver burden which we can compare with drinking alcohol, because the liver deals with all toxic material, whether that is alcohol, whether it is nicotine, or whatever people choose to put into their bodies. And unfortunately, we're breathing in dioxin and formaldehyde and all these other things which also are being processed by the liver. So if we then also take a lot of heavy fats, then we're going to be burdening the liver, because the liver is there to emulsify and help with the digestion of fats. So a low-fat diet will, of course, be very beneficial to the liver. So I may be pointing out some different organ weaknesses which we should not consider to be acute problems which need immediate medical attention. I may point out that someone has a tendency to heart problems. And heart problems are things which develop over many years. And I'm telling you this because I have had situations where I have pointed out someone has a tendency to heart weakness. This person will go to a doctor, get the entire battery of tests for heart problems. Everything shows negative. Then I have her, like a woman recently, or some months ago, her husband and her doctor, all of them were angry at me because I had made this statement that she had a tendency to heart weakness. There is a lot of fear in people, a lot of fear, and some people interpret heart weakness as, you know, you've got some serious problems and you'd better run to the doctor and have him take care of it. The interesting thing is that doctors can't really take care of these problems. It's like you suddenly discover there's nobody there who really can do it except you. And doctors are there to kind of take the edge off of acute problems. But again, for the kind of things we're talking about today, doctors are not so much help, and we have to become our own doctors in a way. In other words, we're preventing. In English, we have this wonderful expression, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And this is the essence of learning diagnosis. We can, with a little bit of preventive measures, we can save ourselves a lot of medical hassles. So, I'll be talking a lot about food, and the kind of foods which we're going to be talking about as being problematic and causing stress in the body are things like refined sugar and tropical fruits. I'll come back to that in a second. Things like coffee and normal black tea, alcohol. We'll be talking about milk products, and that includes everything. Yogurt, that's supposed to be so healthy. Yogurt consumption has risen drastically in the Western world because the word has gotten out that yogurt is really healthy food. It contains a lot of cholesterol, contains a lot of saturated fat, animal protein. It's not actually optimal food for health. And we're going to be talking about other things like eggs and meat, cheese. And one of the things that makes macrobiotics very unique is the fact that we work with energy vibration. We can say that macrobiotics is a synthesis of East and West. We're taking wisdom from the West and wisdom from the East and bringing it together. The Western approach is very analytical, and there we know what happens when you eat the standard American diet. Well, we know that you'll probably have a cholesterol level around 220, which is average today, and that this is actually average sick and not average healthy. And we know what happens. Like Western medical analysis knows that you clog your blood vessels with cholesterol and saturated fat when you eat the normal diet. On the other hand, we have Eastern wisdom, which speaks of the food we take in every day as energy. And this concept of energy is very important, because this is what gives us that extra edge to be able to see the diagnosis. This energy is a vibration which begins at, we can say, higher levels of reality in the entire universe, we could say, and it's an energy vibration which then compacts as it becomes, let's say, earthly. At the moment that we are conceived, this is becoming a very compact, dense form of what was energy before. This energy vibration has two sides to it. One side is contraction. It is an energy tendency to contract. The other is expansion, energy expansion, so that we can only get vibration through the back and forth movement of these two energies, or energy tendencies, let's call them. So one energy is contraction, condensing energy. One energy is expanding. So we call these, following the Chinese model, we call the expansion yin, Y-I-N, and we call the contraction yang, Y-A-N-G. So I will be speaking about yin and yang a lot because these are the two energy vibrations which we can see in people as a result of what they've eaten. So the point is that we should have a balance of these energies. And people who eat healthy are much more imbalanced. They're also much harder to do a facial diagnosis or body diagnosis with because they have broken down the excesses. The easiest people to do diagnosis on are those you just take in off the street and take a look at them. People are eating the normal diet because these people have excesses that you can read very easily. But the longer someone eats proper food, the more difficult it becomes to do the diagnosis because the excesses show themselves less and less as we become more imbalanced. So yin and yang, expansion and contraction. We want balance between these. The important thing here is to understand which foods are more dominating or more dominated by the contraction and which ones are more dominated by the expansion energy tendency. So foods which will create a more yin condition in people or an expanded condition are the following. First of all, chemicals. So if people take drugs, these can be the illegal drugs or they can be medical prescription drugs. But these are in general very, very yin. And we'll go in a little bit to how you can see this on people. Alcohol, also extremely yin, very expanding. So when we think of how a person who is alcoholic looks, you just think, does he have like a firm face or more a face that looks like it's just kind of falling apart? You know, very easy to see. This kind of falling apart, that's what we call yin. It's too expanded. It looks very puffy or flabby, very loose. If someone has a firm face, we wouldn't really suspect this could be alcoholism because you can't be an alcoholic and take in that kind of yin vibration and keep a normal appearance. It will show, unfortunately. You can't hide it. So then we have things like refined sugar. And I cannot stress enough the importance of avoiding sugar if you want to be healthy. It is extremely yin. Many people understand, of course, no drugs, very little alcohol or no alcohol, but they really get stuck in the sugar. We even find people who show signs of sugar addiction, those who have their secret chocolate stash in the cellar, even though they know they shouldn't be eating it. Some people know they shouldn't eat it, but they can't stop because sugar is, in fact, addicting, in my experience. When I think of all the people I have talked to over the years, sugar is again and again the biggest stumbling block to good health. And we'll go in a little bit to why that is. In any case, it has a very strong yin vibrational force and will make people expanded and too yin in their condition. Then also honey. Honey is not a healthy alternative. It is high in simple sugars, and it is basically also an extreme yin food. However, not as extremely yin as sugar. Then we have things like tropical fruits. When we study yin and yang and how these energies affect us, we can think of where plants grow very fast and expand very fast. A banana tree grows up like a weed, grows extremely fast and gets high very fast. And energetically speaking, tropical fruits are very yin, especially if you live in a climate like this here, where we have, let's say this is a moderate climate, 4 seasons with real cold winters. This kind of 4 climate season is not the right place for people who like to eat a lot of tropical fruits. In the tropics, you would do better with them because the heat of the tropics, which we call a yang force heat, will balance the yin energy of tropical fruits to some degree. Now, I've been in the tropics and found that I felt better not eating a lot of tropical fruits because they are very yin even there. But in any case, we have more room for enjoying them there than we do in a moderate climate like here. So, then we have other fruits like citrus fruits, oranges especially. So, Western analytical study shows us that no fruit causes more allergies than oranges. And starting the day with orange juice is a good way to feed an allergy. It's especially the acid in oranges, which is so attractive to people. So we recommend, for balance, don't take strong foods like citrus fruits. Then other strong yin forces would be in dairy food. Yogurt and cottage cheese and milk and ice cream, especially ice cream, everyone's favorite. Ice cream contains sugar, that's yin. It contains a lot of fat, that's yin. It contains over 20 chemical additives if you buy normal ice cream, that's yin. And it is very cold. Now, cold is yin and heat is yang. So you have basically a product which is only extreme yin, and ice cream will throw you off balance very quickly. Then we have other civilization hobbies like coffee. Unfortunately, many people are so far out of balance today that they cannot live without coffee because their blood pressure is so chaotic that they get seizures of low blood pressure and they can't function. So they drink coffee to get going. Recently in Germany, I appeared on a radio program. I was interviewed on the radio, and as I walked into the studio, the man offered me a cup of coffee, as is the custom, and I said, "No thanks, I don't drink coffee." And he says, "How do you wake up in the morning?" Interesting perspective on life. How do you wake up in the morning? See, this is what we call addiction. That's addiction. If you can't get going in the morning without a cup of coffee, you're addicted. You're addicted to caffeine. And if you can drink caffeine free, but you don't like to be without it, then you have a psychological addiction. You just, you need to have that thing that's coffee. So, coffee, black tea or normal tea are also extremely yin. And then something which surprises some people because they think it's so healthy, the so-called nightshade plants. You familiar with the nightshade plants? They're also everyone's favorite. They're potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. And it's interesting that tobacco is also a nightshade. And people who smoke will absorb the essence of nightshades as much as if they ate the nightshade plants. The nightshades contain nitrogen substances which burden the body, both the nervous system and the digestive system. For those who are interested, if you can find the book by Dr. Norman Childers called Nightshades and Illness, you can read about all of the horrors of these so-called healthy foods. Why are they called nightshades? Because they receive their ripening energy from night energy, whereas most of the plants get this from the daylight energy. They get it from night energy, so they're called nightshades. In German, they're also called Nachtschatten. It's the same word, nightshade. So these foods, because they're connected with night, are extremely yin. Daytime and sun is yang, night is yin. But aside from this philosophical perspective, we know that solanine, which is the major nitrogen compound in potatoes and tomatoes, we know that solanine is a poisonous substance, and especially those who suffer from arthritis should not take any nightshades. If you read Dr. Childers' study, you'll find that he was able to turn his arthritis on and off like a TV set just by drinking tomato juice or leaving it alone. When he would drink tomato juice, he got arthritic attacks. When he stopped it, his arthritic pains receded. Then he was so fascinated by this that he tried it then with potatoes. Not just a little bit, but lots of potatoes, like people like to eat every day as their base food for the major meal. He got his arthritis back, and I can recommend this book for all those who are skeptics about potatoes as being a harmful food. In any case, for our macrobiotic purposes, potatoes and tomatoes, peppers and eggplants are very yin, and they give us that excess energy vibration of yin. Then from the other side, we have the so-called yang, or contractive things, those that create hardness, compacting energy, too much density. These are mostly animal foods. This is meat in all forms, also chicken. It is cheese, which is the one dairy food which is more yang. It's a condensed form of milk. You've taken away the water, you've added salt, and especially this hard cheese like cheddar that you have to cut with a cheese knife. This is very yang. And in my experience, one of the major causes of disease in our society. Especially people who are eating vegetarian food and have stopped eating meat. Most of them compensate with cheese, because what else can you put on bread is what I usually hear. Eggs, so very compact energy, very strong yang. And too much salt. Now, salt is very contractive, and if we take the example of salt, everyone can easily imagine how the contractive force here results from the food we take. Think of what it would be like to sprinkle some salt on your tongue. What would happen to the tongue? Immediately it contracts, because salt creates contraction. So this is what makes salt yang, because it creates this contractive energy. It will make you very thirsty. It contracts your throat and makes you want to loosen that up again with liquid. So if you take very salty foods, you'll find yourself attracted to lots of liquid. And so here we have what most people are doing in life, that's eating extreme yin and extreme yang as their basic foods. If you think about the foods I've just described, you have the average diet of most people. So usually comes the next question, well, what is there left to eat? You know, because you've just described everything I eat. And we see why health problems develop in our society, which are very rare, or in any case, much less in other societies. Japan is a very good example for us to see. Japan has a highly industrialized society. It is the only rich nation in the world which is non-European American, so that the stress factor and all these things that go with the modern society that are always considered to be the cause of sickness, there we can get a good idea if it's really that way. And we find that in Japan, we have a totally different pattern of disease than we do in the West. And if we read a comparison of the two countries, or Japan as opposed to actually all the Western industrial countries, not only the United States, then we find that the food is the one thing that separates the Japanese from the West. And for those who think that it's a genetic thing that gives them less breast cancer, less prostate cancer, less colon cancer, the biggest killers in our society, less diabetes. If they think that's genetic, they only have to look at the Japanese immigrants in the US. Japanese immigrants in the US, within 20 years of enjoying the sad diet, have a sickness pattern which very closely resembles the host country, the USA. So we know that food is the major factor. And if I was going to take time to talk about this as my subject today, I could give you lots of medical study background information to support everything I'm saying. The problem is not having, it's not that we don't have enough verification. The real problem is habits. People are so caught up in their habits that they can't change. And life is a changing force every day. And we need that kind of flexibility to try new things, to experiment, to try to leave our prejudices behind and just experiment. We start our morning in our Macrobiotic Center in Sweden, we start every breakfast with a vegetable soup. And it's interesting to see how people say, vegetable soup for breakfast, you know? I can't imagine vegetable soup for breakfast. Well, it's not necessary to eat a vegetable soup for breakfast to be healthy, but we really like it, and I would just say, why not? Why not try a vegetable soup for breakfast? Just getting rid of your habits and experimenting a little bit. In the clinic in Germany, where I work as a nutritional counselor, we offer the patients this vegetable soup for breakfast, and there is a lot of resistance to it the first couple of days, because most of these patients have never considered alternative food, at least not as alternative as we are. And by the time they leave after 4 or 5 weeks, this soup is the most popular thing about the food program we offer. And I hear again and again people say, when I go home after this clinic stay, I'm going to continue with this soup for breakfast regardless of what else I may do wrong. I will do that right. So it's a matter of just being flexible and experimenting and trying out. So what we would then recommend that people do eat, and what is the basis for food, what is more balanced between these two forces of yin and yang, are, number one, whole grains. Now, whole grains have traditionally been the basic food of humanity for most civilizations. Whole grains, that means natural rice, it means whole oats, it means rye and barley and buckwheat and millet, and lots of different varieties. For example, we can eat them in the form of whole grain noodles, we can make breads or we can eat them as the whole grain. We can press them and make flakes like rolled oats. But whole grain should be the pillar of our food, as well as vegetables. These two, vegetables without the nightshades and whole grains. Now, on my book, which is in German, so many of you may have trouble reading this. In any case, you can see on the cover the idea behind this. So, a little bit to the yang side or compact side, we have the whole grains. This is wheat. And wheat is an example of balanced yang. It's a compact energy, but it's a different compact energy than meat. So this should be the balance on the yang side. On the other side, you'll see with the sprouts here, these show the expansion. But it's a balanced kind of expansion. It's the kind of expansion we have with vegetable quality food, things growing higher water content. Water gives it more yin, it's a more expanded content. The drier it is, the more yang. So these two are the basis of healthy food. Now, you can eat this in these different forms, but one thing we don't recommend is eating raw grains, but rather cooking the grains. Cooked grains become much more digestible. And with the vegetables, they can be cooked or else also eaten raw. Because of the cooling effect of raw vegetables, we generally eat more of raw quality in the summer, less in the winter. Someone who eats only raw foods will tend to be too yin, too expanded. And when we get into audience participation, it would be interesting if someone is eating only raw foods. It'd be fun to have the raw food enthusiasts come forward and we can take a look at them and see, do they look like they're balanced between yin and yang? Because from their point of view, which is analytical, raw food is the perfect food. It's left in its natural state. All enzymes, everything is there, and that's true. Raw food is valuable as a part of our food. But what happens when people eat only raw foods? What scientists have discovered is that there is a tendency for alcohol to build up in the intestines as a result of the fermentation that's going on. It's called fusel alcohol. This fusel alcohol can give you a red nose that we would think of someone who just takes too much alcohol in the form of alcoholic beverages. In any case, my experience, especially living in a cold country like Sweden, is that people are happier when they are eating predominantly cooked food and eating raw foods only as a supplement, rather than eating only raw foods. So, then we have the seaweeds, which are something very unusual for many people, the thought of eating seaweeds. But seaweeds are very high in minerals. Now, minerals are something very compact. So minerals are especially good for people who are demineralized. You become demineralized by, number one, eating too much sugar, or number two, eating too much raw fruit or drinking a lot of fruit juices, or just too much liquid. If you have been a great fan of ice cream in the past, you really do need seaweeds. Now, seaweeds does not mean a major dish. Seaweeds are a side dish taken occasionally, although we may take some every day just as an ingredient in a soup where it's hardly noticed. The amounts we eat are very small, but because they're so mineral rich, they are especially good for people who are in need of more mineralization. Now, I spend a lot of time looking at blood analysis and hair analysis of people who have health problems. And almost everybody, and I really mean almost everybody who is not satisfied with his health has some mineral imbalance. This mineral imbalance is not easily detectable by a standard blood test. But if you get the red blood cell test, the RBC blood test, you can delve deeper into your biochemistry. And many people who are suffering from different problems basically are just out of balance with minerals. And when they eat the mineral-rich food, which macrobiotics offers, they come into balance, even without the blood test. You don't have to do that. I usually recommend people to take such a test if they switch their food over to macrobiotic recommendations and they still are not satisfied, because some people may have such a big deficit that they don't really fill that up just with food. They may have to take some kind of mineral therapy, special mineral tablets or some concentrate. So it's different. In any case, seaweed. So I will be mentioning sometimes when I have people come forward, maybe that they should take some seaweed condiments with their food, because it's interesting to see what we've got, but it would be not really satisfactory if we just talk about what our problems are without thinking about the solutions, which is also the reason why I'm going into this food thing so much, because with macrobiotic thinking, we understand that there is no way around food. If you don't eat good food, you're just not going to be healthy no matter what you do. You can go out and jog, you can meditate, you can take lots of mineral supplements, but if sugar and saturated fat are your daily food, you're going to be stressing your body so that you're going to be in trouble. And it's very difficult to balance that out again. So the one animal quality food which we recommend is fish. And I may recommend someone to take some fish. It's interesting to consider fish from a yin-yang point of view. Fish is, in its texture, is much lighter. You don't need to cut it with a knife like you do a piece of meat. It's very, very soft. So we would say it's more yin. It has a more expanded quality. It's less compact, less yang. However, animal food is dense food. So fish still is rated as what we would call more yang, but it goes further out yang than the grain yang we talked about earlier. So, a small portion of fish. This doesn't mean fish every day. We'd probably get tired of that. But there's a wide variety of fish. There's all kinds. There's ocean fish. There's lake fish. There's so much variety that it's not like just saying we eat just chicken, because chicken is always chicken. But fish, a lot of variety. So this is a supplement, and especially good for people who live in a cold climate. Because aside from all the theory, my experience living in Sweden is that most people in the long run are not satisfied with a full vegetarian diet if they live in a cold climate, and that fish offers that extra bit of richness which they're looking for. And if they don't take it in some animal form like fish, they'll probably end up snacking on cheese at some time again. It's the usual way it goes. So then there's some seeds and nuts we take as garnishes. And for protein, which we take some form of protein food every day, that's some bean or bean product like tofu. Now, someone who is very young may need more tofu. Tofu is a yin form of the soybean. You take away the fiber is the dense part, and you leave the fat and the protein. So you've got a more expanded food. So someone who has excess of yang may choose to take more often their protein in form of tofu than if they had more yin problems. So for drinking, instead of coffee or black tea, we take natural teas, but they shouldn't be strong aromatic teas. These are very yin. If they have a strong smell like peppermint or chamomile. If we know when we're using those, that's okay. Chamomile is wonderful to put someone who is wound up back at rest so that they can sleep in the evening. It's wonderful instead of taking sleeping tablets. But if you're drinking chamomile tea every day as your thirst quencher, you may find that you're a little slow because you're actually giving yourself a sleeping tablet several times a day. You may wonder why you don't really get going. So we take a neutral tea. This one we call bancha, B-A-N-C-H-A. It's a Japanese word. Cha just means tea. It's just a natural tea. It's taken from the same bush that the other tea is taken from, but it's from the very bottom part. It doesn't contain very much of those harmful substances that are so yin. But they are those things that perk us up if people need the black tea or green tea to get awake. So this is basically how the food would look. And this is the yin and yang. You understand a little bit about that, so that when we go on now in this session and start going into more specifics about people, you can keep in mind that these foods are the basis. But I will also add that food is obviously not the only thing that determines our health. If we have every day physical exercise, or especially physical work, this makes us more yang. Activity is yang. So passive activities are more yin. Someone who works at a desk is actually making himself more yin than someone who is out working outside with his hands, lifting things. So if your job is more yin or passive, desk job, you should actively seek physical exercise. Of course, the best physical exercise is what we can call really life-related. That means not just getting on a stationary bicycle and running, but rather keeping your house in order, taking care, cooking your food, which is also work, back and forth in the kitchen, taking time if a child falls, going over, helping the child. This is all part of our activities, a service to other people and helping out other people. We'll find we become very active. Today, there's a tendency for people to be very ego-oriented, and when they think they need more activity, it's more just some kind of empty exercise that doesn't really produce anything. This is not to say that such things are wrong. Obviously, they can also be right. But let's just keep a balanced picture of physical exercise as not just being lifting weights and things, but actually getting out and being active in life. And of course, when we're active mentally, this makes us more yang. Watching TV is a very passive thing. And of course, at certain times, TV is a very valuable tool. We know what's going on in the world, we can learn new things. But the US is #1 in the world with TV viewing, at about 4 hours a day. The average American spends 4 hours a day watching TV. And this is really a lot for someone who is trying to keep a balance. This will make you more yin, aside from the fact that the radiation coming from the TV set is also more yin radiation. So there's lots of things that are affecting our health, but I'm going to keep coming back to the food again and again, because this is what we're really talking about here for the basis of health. The other things are the supportive issues. So now you have a good picture of what kind of food we're talking about, what makes you more yin, what makes you more yang, and we're going to then go into the actual diagnosis in our next session, and we'll then see how these foods affect us and how people look who eat normal foods and how people look who are eating really healthy foods. And with time, we'll be able to see these on ourselves, and most people tell me they start seeing the world really through a different perspective, the magic spectacles, when they practice this form of Oriental diagnosis. So I think we'll conclude for this session, and then we'll continue later.